last week we debuted a new show segment, Presnap Notion, to kick things off. Trey, you lowered the boom of reality with Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M and a reason why the Aggies
And
are
it played out perfectly on Saturday
just so
because
dang passive, man. And it did. It absolutely did. I turned that game off before I went to go get engaged, so I wouldn't have no negative vibes, no disappointment heading into the happiest moment of my life to this point. I will say, when I got back and saw that they had lost, I wasn't surprised. But, gentlemen, this week I was in the lab a little bit and cooked up this notion for your review. I want to play out a scenario for you. And my thesis statement is that Texas, contrary to what many may think, is going to get left out of the college football playoff by the committee if the following sequence happens. Oregon beats Washington in the championship game. Michigan goes undefeated. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Georgia gets to the SEC championship game undefeated. They can lose to whoever comes out of the West. They just have to make it to Atlanta 12-0, and Florida State runs the table. Now, you may wonder, okay, that sounds reasonable, but the second part of my thesis isn't because Texas didn't have something on the field, didn't prove something. It's because their losses to Oklahoma that suddenly looks a whole lot more unimpressive after a 2-game losing streak and, surprise, surprise, a tough game against West Virginia on tap. Texas getting left out of the college football playoff because of their loss would maybe be the most infuriating thing to happen to Texas since Colt McCoy got hurt in the national championship game. Hot, cold, reasonable, unreasonable. I invite your thoughts.
well, Garrett and I kind of discussed this a little bit. We didn't get too deep into it on the Sunday show, but I'm with you on that. I think if this scenario plays out exactly, the only kicker to me is what happens. I don't think the SEC champion gets left out absolutely. So, swap in. If you don't think the SEC gets 2 in, if Georgia loses the championship, then swap in Georgia for Alabama, right? But yeah, I'm with you. I don't think that Texas has done enough outside of the win against Alabama to say that they should be in over in Oregon or over an undefeated Florida State or over, maybe even in Ohio State that the committee seems to love, even if Ohio State does what they do last year and lose to Michigan and miss out on the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah.
It's a tough road out of the Big 12. I mean, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I think only one time have we seen a one-loss Big 12 champion make the playoff, correct? Maybe twice with Oklahoma, but it doesn't happen all that often. It is a tough road. There's a razor-thin margin for error out of the Big 12. It's one of the reasons why Texas and Oklahoma are moving to the SEC, but they could very well be the odd man out. They would have to be very, very impressive in their stretch run here. They're not going to get a lot of credit for beating TCU, Iowa State, and Texas Tech. They have to be very impressive in those 3 games, win by a lot of points, and put on a very big performance against Oklahoma State if all this plays out just to sneak in my mind.
So I guess, Mitch, in this situation, we're assuming, because we got to kind of map it out, right? We're assuming this is Michigan and Florida State at the top. That would be the assumption. If they both run the table, they go undefeated, they win their conferences. Yep. They got to be 1-2. And then I guess we're saying, I guess it depends on what happens in the SEC championship game for me on this situation. So if Georgia wins, I think this is where things get interesting. If Georgia loses, they're not going to get left out. It'll be, I guess we're assuming Bama and Georgia.
They're the 3 or the 4 seed, right?
Yeah, or you could argue for Oregon if you really wanted to. But I think the leaving Oregon in play is really where it gets to be the concern, because if Georgia wins and you're talking about 1-loss conference champion Oregon or 1-loss conference champion Texas, this is really just a who does the media love more for ratings fest, because let's be real, this is still a business. And no matter what the committee really wants to do, they're going to try to put ratings on the table. And I just have a hard time believing that they're going to leave Texas off for what that would mean for the ratings, what that would mean for everything else. They'll find a way to say that Oregon's loss was, uglier somehow than Texas's loss to Oklahoma. And, well, but Texas has the signature win over Alabama. And look, that's an Alabama that made the championship game. And or possibly won it or whatever. So I have a hard time believing that they're going to leave Texas out, whether it's deserved or not. I just have a hard time believing the committee will leave Texas off completely if this scenario plays out where Georgia would win the SEC championship game.
For me, I think where this borders on a hot take is because strength of schedule is clearly one metric that the committee values, right? With Ohio State, that is literally the only explanation why Ohio State is the top team in the country. Although that soundbite that the commissioner had to give, or the chairman had to give about a top 20 Rutgers defense was just chef's kiss. I mean, when have we ever heard that? But Texas has a top 10 strength of schedule. According to the metrics that I looked up, Oregon is coasting in at 61st. Now, Oregon's wins to me in the eye test will be infinitely more impressive than Texas's wins if all else holds. Now, Texas, will have to beat maybe Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game. That second seed has gotten a lot warmer. We're not exactly sure who's going to end up anchoring that in Arlington, but for me, metrics aside, I look at Oregon and I am so much more impressed with Oregon than I am a Texas team. To me, this is not even close given the scenario I've outlined. Plus, Ohio State with one loss, Trey, as you mentioned, they've gotten in before without having to go to the Big Ten championship game. They'd be lurking around that 4, 5, 6 seeding with one loss to Michigan. I don't even know if the committee bumps Ohio State out of the top 4 with the loss to Michigan, as long as they don't get blown out.
Yeah, and there's just too many teams for Texas to jump at this point, right? Like, I think what we haven't mentioned yet is they would have to jump Oregon. And to do that, they're going to have to be more impressive than Oregon down the stretch. So winning your conference and looking more impressive, like you said, Mitch, they just haven't done that to this point this year. Oregon has looked way better on the eyeball test. And I don't know how much of Texas' strength of schedule is actually getting propped up by the fact that their bye games out of conference have turned out to be decent. The Rice, the Wyoming. I'm sure that's not all of it, but I mean, if we're comparing, apples to apples here, like, does it really matter that Texas beat Rice instead of Portland State? Not really, right? Like, we're comparing the top wins. So I don't, again, not a math major, don't know how that's factored in, but that could be something that the committee looks at as well.
I will say one more thing. I think that this will entirely depend on how Oregon looks down the stretch, whether it's fair or not. If they beat USC by like 3 this weekend, I don't think that goes a long way in helping them.
Texas beats TCU by 20, though.
Right? Yeah. Like if Texas goes out the rest of the schedule and they just beat the crap out of everybody on the way out, and they go play Oklahoma State in the Big 12 championship game and they beat them by 20 points or something like that, and then Oregon kind of barely beats USC, just crawls past Oregon State. Maybe they play Washington in the finale and they just barely come out on top of that one. I don't know how much that goes in their favor. I think we could be looking at a TCU Baylor situation from a few years back where it's two teams that look really, really good with Oregon and Washington, but they're going to get left out because this other team looked more dominant and then just jumps them on the very last day. So it kind of depends on how Oregon looks, I think, on the way out.
Well, let us know your thoughts. Does Texas make it in to the college football playoff, all else equal? Do they get left out? Where would you rank the Longhorns in your college football playoff? Again, at 3TechPod, let us know. Respond in the comments to the YouTube channel. We'll get back to you. Love to continue to have this discussion with you.
Gracious, how